we got to spend a minute talking about Emmanuel Quickley. I'm recording this, it's 5:37 on Thursday night. I've had, about 20 hours to digest last night's game, and I've been thinking about it in a lot of different ways. And I think I've arrived at the conclusion that Immanuel Quickley's emergence, and is it premature to call what we saw last night he played, I think, 25 minutes, but only 7 of those were really running the offense. Is it premature to call that an emergence? Probably. But at the same time, he had this night, and the night that he had was, despite the fact that the one thing that he is supposed to bring to the table, he didn't even do last night, which is shoot the three. He was 1 for 6 from deep. And yet, he came out looking like this revelation. And I don't think it's an overstatement to call it, again, the single biggest thing that could have happened to the Knicks in this preseason. And here's why. If Dennis Smith Jr. or Frank Ntilikina, or for that matter, Elfrid Payton, came out at the point guard position and looked legit, whatever legit is for those particular guys, but looked like they had taken a step up, yes, there would be a lot of hope. But at the same time, there would also be a lot of doubt, because those guys are both in their 4th year now. We've seen flashes from all of them, respectively, at various times. Well, Peyton kind of is what he is, but, sticking with Dennis Smith Jr. and Frank Ntilikina for a second, we've seen flashes from those guys, right? Dennis Smith Jr., as I've written about a lot over the last few weeks, he had a rookie year in Dallas that was, not winning basketball. That was not being played, but it was the foundation of something. He was an interesting player. Whether he was ever going to reach that ceiling, I've had discussions with some of the Strickland guys about how much of that is kind of like a false hope, because so much needs to go right for Dennis Smith Jr. for him to ever reach that ceiling. But the point is, if either one of those guys had come out and looked the part for a game or two, the easy response to that will be okay, it's a preseason game. We have 3 years worth of evidence that neither of these guys are the answer. So what we would have seen would be dubious, right? And then you think about, okay, well, what's the other big stuff that could have happened this preseason? And it's okay, Obi Toppin coming out and looking dominant. He hasn't looked dominant yet, but I would argue that Quickley coming out and doing what he did is more important and actually a lot more impressive than if Obi came out and just, put up 20 a game all 3 games, because I don't think anyone questions that if you give Obi the chance to play in a situation that is conducive to his talents, he's going to be that guy. He's going to be the guy that can give you 20 points pretty easily. Yeah, the 3-point shot has not come around of yet, but we're already seeing him making the passes. We're already seeing him, show the athleticism. He's, calling stuff out on defense. He's, he's pointing, he's active, he's moving around. You could see the foundation is there, and God forbid they ever put him out in a lineup where he's either the small ball 5 surrounded by shooters, or, there's at least 3 shooters around him. Hell, look at the lineup that ended in the 4th quarter last night. Was he the central focus of that group? No. Was he absolutely instrumental to a lot of those plays being successful? 100%. And I've gone back and I've watched that 4th quarter now a few times. And I could say that without question. Quickley coming out and doing what he did, and just for a moment, putting the notion into the air that, wait a minute, the Knicks may have found a guy. I'm not calling him the potential for point guard of the future, because he's not a point guard. And I know people are going to hear me and get mad at that, but that's not the point. You don't need to be a point guard in the most traditional sense. And I said this in my post-game Periscope after the game, to play point guard in the NBA, provided you are surrounded with the right types of pieces. Guys like an RJ Barrett, a big wing who could do some stuff, including some playmaking. So I don't think the question is like, is he the point guard of the future in the most traditional sense? Like, no, he's not, he's not Jalen Suggs. And even that's probably not the best example, because I'm trying to think of someone who's a real classic point guard. And the fact of the matter is there aren't that many of them anymore, because most guys that come out are somewhere along the sliding scale of combo guard, right? They score first and foremost, and then it comes down to, okay, how much playmaking, vision, handle, all the other stuff do they have in addition to the various ways that they could score the ball? And I think what we saw, and why I'm so hype, again, almost a full day after this, is that he has enough of those skills. Did it come against, I don't even remember the kid's name, Mooney? It's either Moody or Mooney. I feel like Mooney is if that's not his name, that's being cruel, but I'm going to go with Mooney. Whoever the hell he was playing on the Cavs third stringers. Did that make a difference? Yeah, sure, it made a difference. But again, as I wrote in Thursday's newsletter, which I focused on quickly, those were the same guys who had the Knicks starters down whatever it was, 18 points. So I'm not going to put too much stock in the fact that it came against lesser competition. I'm more focusing on the vision that he displayed, the ability to hit, not hard passes, but not easy passes either. And just the fact that he played with some piss and vinegar. And there was a zip to the offense. Everybody was flying around. And that all came from him. So now the question becomes, and if this isn't the overarching question that will hang over at least the beginning of this next season, I would be shocked. What happens to Quickley now? And I think there's three distinct possibilities. The first possibility is Tibbs tries to put the genie back in the bottle. And, Frank Ntilikina comes back healthy. Austin Rivers comes back. Dennis Smith Jr. continues to get time, kind of, not regardless of his level of play. Let's say regardless of his offensive level of play, because his defense, as I pointed out, and I got a little bit of pushback on Twitter today, but I stand by this. His defense has been damn good. Does he just, okay, well, time to go back to the bench. Your time will come, rookie. And we get, a first 30 games that are not unlike, let's say, what we saw Tibbs do with Josh Okogie in his last year in Minnesota, where, you had a couple games where it was 25 minutes a night, and then a couple handfuls of DMPs, or like more or less DMPs where he played 2-3 minutes. I wouldn't be shocked. Here's why I don't think it's going to happen. Two, actually. Two names. Kenny Payne and Worldwide Wes. And those guys, they are there, and their voices loom large. I don't know how large their voices loom, because I have heard some things about things that they wanted to happen over this offseason that did not happen, and everybody should be thankful that they did not happen. But their voices are absolutely big voices in that room, and Leon Rose, by all indication, is listening to all those voices. So, you're not going to have two bigger guys in Immanuel Quickley's corner than them. So that's one. Two, someone reached out to me, and someone with the Knicks reached out to me recently. And again, I don't want it to seem like I'm breaking any news here, because this is, you could watch any Thibodeau team and see the guys he plays, and you'd know this. He has no use for point guards who can't score. And those were actually the words that were used to me. He has no use for them. And that's upsetting to a certain extent, right? Because, for those of us who are fans of Frank Ntilikina. But again, as I've been saying for literally months, they're not going to play Frank at point guard. They were never going to play Frank at point guard, and they're still not going to play Frank at point guard. And now the fact that Quickley has emerged, it only solidifies that fact. So, yeah, I think Tibbs is a fan of having. And look, just go through the history. Who has he played? Who does he give big minutes to? Derrick Rose, DJ Augustine, Nate Robinson, Jeff Teague. Who has he maybe been resistant to invest serious time in? Guys like Ricky Rubio and Tyus Jones. So what's the difference between those two groups of guys? One group can score and, yes, do a little point guarding whilst scoring. And the other group of guys are more traditional, like, I'm just going to get everybody involved and I'm not going to worry first and foremost about putting the ball in the basket. Well, we've seen Tibbs' history. We know what guys he likes. So no, I don't think the genie goes back in the bottle. So that leaves two other options. The first of which is Quickley stays coming off the bench. He's a part of the rotation, but he's not, he's like not the starter. Or we just go batshit crazy. And, whether it's tonight, whether it's game 1 of the season, whether it's game 3, whether it's game 5, but somewhere in this vicinity, he hands the keys over to the kid and says, you know what? We're going to suck this year anyway. Why not have you learn on the fly and get as many reps as possible? And I think that there's a real argument for that happening because, Elfrid Payton, he could score. He could score, but he can't score in the ways that you need a point guard to score in order to have a functional, somewhat aesthetically pleasing offense in the game today. And for as long as Julius Randle is here, and I don't see him being moved anytime soon. If he's here, he's going to start. And he's going to start along either Nerlens Noel or Mitchell Robinson. And he's also going to start alongside RJ Barrett. Now, RJ, his shot has looked much better. But, Alec Burks, he ain't. And I'm using Burks as the example because he's the guy that's here. So you have that little shooting, and then you have Payton in addition to it, and you get what we saw last night for the better part of 3.5 quarters, which is a defense that, and I watched this entire game over again. Like, they had their opportunities. The Cavs could have played them even smarter than they did and dared guys like Payton and Randall to shoot even more. So I think better, smarter, more experienced defenses are going to be able to put the screws to the Knicks even more than the Cavs did for a while last night. And whether it's a zone or whatever it is, and I don't think Tibbs wants to go out and look at that every night. I certainly don't. And I don't think many of you do either. And if Randall's here, well, that means like how many non-shooters are you going to have out there? And I think there's a possibility that we could be in line to see Immanuel Quickley start. I'll put it this way. If the two choices over the first 30 games, because we know he's going to play a lot towards the end of the year. I'm just talking about like the first 25, 30 games. If the choices are more or less out of the rotation on most nights or starter, gun to my head, if you force me to pick one of those, I think I would pick starter by a hair. But I don't think he's going to start because I don't think Tibbs can do that quite yet to Payton. And I don't think it's about Payton's ego or anything like that. I think it's just, that's just placing a lot of faith in a kid who struggled to play point guard at the college level. And yeah, he did a lot of cool stuff the other night, but there's going to be growing pains. And again, it bears repeating. That was against the Cavs, C squad. So my gut feeling, the starting lineup, I don't know whether it's going to be tonight or for whenever he ultimately makes this decision to start the year. I think it's going to be Payton. I think it's going to be, I think it's going to be Burks. I think it's going to be RJ. I think it's going to be Randall. And I'm on the fence now. I'm not sure if it's going to be Mitch or Noel. I'd still probably put my money on Noel, but I could be Mitch. And then for your backups, I think whichever of the centers doesn't start. Obviously, Obi is going to be the backup 4. I think Dennis Smith Jr. is going to keep getting minutes at the backup point guard spot, and I think hit a couple threes last night. It's like he is, he's like the guy on life support that they're ready to pull the plug, and then at the last minute, somebody runs in with like some, long lost, just uncovered will and testament that's like, oh no, wait, he said don't pull it yet. We're not. He wants to stay, with this tube shoved down his throat. That's Dennis Smith Jr. right now. He's on life support, but I think he's done enough to stay on life support because, again, I think the defense has been good. And for as bad as he has run the show, and my goodness, has it been just beyond atrocious in terms of running an offense. I think he's at least trying to do the right stuff. He's not making like utterly, completely boneheaded plays. It's like he forgot how to play the sport of basketball, which in a weird way, I think is actually not more forgivable, but like, you think he could get over that. Or maybe not. I don't know. I think Tibbs thinks he can get over it. So I think Dennis Smith Jr. is going to stay as the backup point guard. With a slight possibility that Frank takes that role, but and this is a transition to Quickley, who I think is going to be the de facto co-backup point guard, for the time being. And whether it's next to Frank, whether it's next to Dennis Smith Jr., whether they rejigger the rotation minutes such that, RJ is the one who is going to be, in there, with them, like whatever it is. There's a lot of different ways you could give him assistance with the playmaking and the ball handling and all that. I think he's going to be in there. And then that leaves one spot left. And I continue to believe that somehow Austin Rivers is going to get time. And I don't know how or where or when, but I think he's going to get time. But yet, I have to put Kevin Knox at the backup 3 because again, as bad as he looked, it was only a quarter, but he reminded you why he was the 8th pick in the draft. And I know a lot of people thought he should have never been picked anywhere close to that high. And that's fine because you have, again, 2 years of evidence to back up that fact. But man, when he does things, and he did things last night, it makes you wonder. It makes you wonder. So I think he's going to stay the backup 3. Where does that leave Austin Rivers? Hell, maybe Austin Rivers, is the one who takes Dennis Smith Jr.'s job, and he's the guy who's kind of the caddy for Quickley, as Quickley gets accustomed to playing point guard or quasi point guard, whatever the hell you want to call it, at the NBA level. I don't know. I think this season's going to be the type that, and we've seen the Knicks do shit like this before, where, you have a guy who's like, okay, so-and-so's out tonight with an ankle. So-and-so's out tonight with I don't know. He's under the weather. Or, the elephant in the room, somebody gets COVID. Whatever it is, I think those are my 11. And yes, I think Frank is the 12th looking in, but I think those are the first 11. I think somebody will be out more often than not, so it'll get down to 10. And then I think Frank will be the guy who can, he's like, someone doesn't have it tonight, let's send Frank in there to try to wreak havoc on defense and move the ball around on offense. And that's my prediction, until, of course, they make a trade. And then when they make a trade, We'll see what happens then, and then we reassess. And I do think they're going to make a trade at some point. I don't think it's going to be right away, but I think they will make it at some point.